Good evening and welcome to the Duelist 10 Bookshop's virtual event series. My name is Chrissy and I'm thrilled to welcome authors Daniel Kraus and Gabino Iglesias as they discuss Daniel's new book, The Living Dead. The authors will speak for about 30 minutes, then I'll come back in to moderate the Q&A portion of the event. Please submit your questions by clicking on Ask a Question at the bottom of your screen and typing the questions in there. If you would like to purchase The Living Dead from the Duelist 10 Bookshop, please click the Buy the Book Here button on your screen. Daniel Kraus is the author of numerous novels, including Rotters, The Death and Life of Zebulon Finch duology, and Bent Heavens. With Guillermo del Toro, he wrote the New York Times bestselling The Shape of Water, which was the companion novel to the Academy Award-winning film, and Trollhunters, which is the inspiration for the Netflix series. His novels have won multiple awards. Gabino Iglesias is a writer, editor, journalist, and book reviewer. He is the author of Coyote Songs, Zero Saints, and Gut Mouth. He is also the book reviews editor, and his nonfiction work it has appeared in places like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the LA Times, El Nuevo Dia, and other venues. His fiction work has been published in places like Red Fez, Flash Fiction Offensive, Drunk Monkeys, and many other horror, crime, surrealist, and bizarro anthologies. When not writing or reading, he has worked as a dog whisperer, witty communications professor, and ballerina assassin. I think that's my favorite. His reviews are published in places like NPR, Volume 1 Brooklyn, and Criminal Element. He also teaches at SNHU's MFA program. I'm now going to give it over to our authors.
Thanks. I think I could use your dog whispering right now. I've got some dogs who look like they're about to bark like crazy, so we'll see what happens.
We'll work something out.
Thanks.
Listen, man, first of all, kudos. I'm super happy this thing is out. I'm sure you're happy too. It's not the best time to have a book out. But it seems like you're doing the work, and I'm super happy to be here to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think my first huge question comes from being a writer myself. There's a massive amount of research that went into this,
Yeah.
but also the pure joy that you experience writing it comes through the page, and I wanted to know the hardest part from realizing you've been tasked with this massive thing. You're putting a little scar on the face of horror forever. Rewatching the movies and then actually having all that fun. I wanted to know the best and the worst of
Right.
a massive book.
Yeah, that's a great question. The research, I mean, just from a kind of nuts and bolts point of view, this is maybe the less interesting kind of way to answer the question, but there's a big section that takes place on an aircraft carrier, and it was a section that George Romero had started, but not gotten all that far into. And he clearly had done a bunch of research, and but he didn't leave the research for me. The research was gone. So I had to talk about something I don't know anything about, aircraft carriers, the Navy. I just don't, it was just far outside of my wheelhouse. So that was just a ton. Every section required a lot of research, but that section was intense. But thankfully, I visited the aircraft carrier that's in New York. And I got a private tour of it because one of the head PR people was a huge George Romero fan, and so it became like a even better than normal tour because he was thinking the whole time about creatively, thinking about a zombie could get sucked into this engine here, or he could get thrown out of this window here. So he was actively trying to help. The worst part. There were parts that were extremely difficult, and those would be, and we can talk about this more later maybe, but the pieces of George's manuscript didn't come all at once. Some pieces came later causing me to have to back up a whole bunch and reconfigure a lot of hundreds of pages of writing. But I wouldn't call that, it was hard, but it wasn't painful in any way. Like, it was such a joy anytime I got more Romero material to work with. I think maybe the toughest part was balancing what I knew I needed to do as a writer, particularly when doing a revision or working with the editor, versus how badly I wanted to keep every word that George had written. And those things can't work perfectly together. Like, there were some things I had to cut out that he had written that I just, try as I might, I couldn't figure out a place to wedge them in. And I tried every trick I knew in the book to keep every one of his words that I could in, whether it meant, combining characters or moving it hundreds of pages somewhere else, you name it. I found ways to work it, but there were a few things that I just couldn't figure out and I had to cut. And those were just sort of emotionally hard because I just didn't want to do it.
I think you should have kept the hippos.
Mm-hmm.
I would have loved to see the hippos in there, but
yeah, in the author's, what he's referring to is in the author's note. I mentioned one wonderfully batshit scene that George wrote that involved an imminent zombie attack being foiled by hippos, which, I mean, that's just awesome. And I hope someday I can use that nugget to do something with.
That's pretty cool. I think the book works on a variety of levels, and one of the ones that I found more interesting as a Romero fan was realizing he was a novelist. He was a writer. He wanted to get this thing done, and then it took forever, and we never saw it until now. Thanks to you, by the way. Do you think that comes out now, and it sort of helps us reframe all of his films, the rest of his work, understanding the passion that he had for the written word?
Well, I hope so. I mean, part of what I hope this book does, and it's a ambitious goal that it probably won't succeed in all that much, but I would love people to just kind of reboot their understanding and their appreciation of George Romero. He didn't make a lot of films in his last, I mean, it wasn't quite a decade, but almost his last decade of life. He was still actively trying all the time. So I don't want people to forget about him. He was an incredibly important filmmaker, obviously a key filmmaker in the history of horror, but also a key independent filmmaker in the history of film. And for people who are interested in just independent film alone, they should be aware of him and not just his zombie work. I think one of the reasons the estate came to me was that they knew that I wasn't so obsessed with zombies. It was that I was obsessed with George Romero, all of his films and all of his work. And although this is a zombie book, so obviously this is going to send people back to the zombie films. I hope they spread out from there and see the rest of his work, some of which is just so wonderful. Just to mention one, if people out there haven't seen Martin, it's like, it should be up there with like Taxi Driver and Midnight Cowboys, like really important 1970s films. Unfortunately, you can't see it. It's one of the films of his that is completely unavailable right now in the US. You can buy a used DVD for, $80 or something. And that's just so indicative of his career. Just being an incredible artist who was constantly fighting against forces, whether they were on the production side or distribution side, that were always seemingly at odds. But so, yeah, he was a writer, until this novel was, until I finished the novel, he had published one piece of traditionally published prose fiction, a story called Clay in a 1980s paperback anthology. And it's so good. I mean, it's really a fantastic story. So he had chops. There wasn't any question about it. And then, the fact that he worked on this book on and off for 10 years. So it was something that I think bedeviled him a little bit because he could bust out a screenplay in a few days. And I think the weight of a book, particularly an epic book, which he wanted to write, it slowed him down, and he would give up in periods and then come back. But the fact that he kept coming back, I think, says how much it meant to him.
Yeah. Hopefully that changes and we can actually get everything he ever did at some point.
Yeah.
Maybe this helps. This is very strange because there's an emotional angle for you in this book that I didn't expect and I really connected with. J.F. Gonzalez was a master of horror fiction. He passed away, unfortunately, way too soon because of cancer. And the state contacted me to finish his last novel.
Yeah,
so
right.
Reading your your same version of this, obviously on a other level, I connected with that, and I remember that phone call from Brian Keene, and immediately saying yes, and then upon hanging up, the rest of it came in, and I was wondering, you were a huge fan. Then you found Chris. I forgot his last name.
Yeah, Chris.
So exactly. So it was sort of meant to happen. So I'm pretty sure you said yes immediately, but I'm sure you hung up after that, and then realized the task that you had on your hands and what it meant for you, for George, for his legacy, and for horror. And
man,
I was wondering. Yeah.
I had completely forgotten that you're finishing that book. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about.
This was inspiring.
Yeah, we can continue to talk after the event because the situation is so similar. And Romero wasn't, I wasn't just a fan. I grew up with him. He was a father figure to me. I saw Night of the Living Dead at 5 or 6 years old, and then just kept seeing it, and it shaped dramatically, I think, who I was. I grew up in a small rural town in Iowa. Having a progressive filmmaker like Romero, and then my other guy growing up was Rod Serling, it shaped me so much as a person, and then certainly later as an artist. What was the question?
Oh, your emotional roller coaster.
Oh yeah, right.
Yes.
I mean, yeah. So I said yes right away, and I was of course stunned and numb a little bit. And yeah, it was the pressure. I will say this: the pressure never came from the Romero estate. It was all self-inflicted pressure, which I think is good, particularly when if you're dealing with handling your hero's legacy to some degree. I think you want to feel the pressure. You want to feel the pressure to bring the best that you've got. And in this case, to send off your hero in the grandest way possible. There's certainly an expectation that if the book succeeds for some people, they will applaud Romero, and if the book fails for them, they will damn me to hell. But that's cool. I'm okay with that, and you'll have to be okay with that on your collaboration as well. My defense mechanism as a writer, when faced with challenges or bigger projects, is to just work really, really hard and get to work immediately and bury myself in work. So I don't have time to think about that stuff. And there was so much research to be done here. Yes, in the technical sense, but also just research into George himself to sort of understand him better. There was months of that, and there was no reason I couldn't start it the day after getting that phone call. So I just dove into it.
And I think you sort of became a Romero scholar in a way.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There are tiny tidbits inside the novel that those who share that passion with you will have a great time. Those who miss it are still going to enjoy the novel a hell of a lot. You mentioned digging into the work immediately, but I think you mentioned somewhere that it took you about 2 years, which is very fast for, number one, the amount of words in this thing, number two, the amount of research, and then number three, the fact that you were collaborating without any sort of time frame, and then you're 400 pages in and you get some new pages. So how much of your day, how much of your life was consumed by getting this thing done in basically 24 months?
Most of it, yeah. I tend to work on a lot of projects at once because it helps me. I don't have to, when I'm finished with a draft, for example, I don't have to put it in a drawer and just twiddle my thumbs for a few months until I can return to it fresh. I can just move to another project, and they are palate cleansers for each other. So I made immediately everything else that I was working on got sidelined, because originally we had a hilariously optimistic notion that we were going to get this book out for the 50th anniversary of Night of the Living Dead, which was ridiculous. So there was an additional hurry at the beginning of it, maybe before I had a truly full sense of the scope of the project. And just, again, I was probably just being, I don't know, maybe I was being arrogant to think that I could pull it off in any shorter time. 2 years for me is a long time. I'm a fast writer, but this, it was a complicated book. And actually, a lot, some of it was written, like I had pages to work with, but those actually took longer to deal with those written pages than it was to write new pages.
Right.
Because I was having to incorporate other things that he didn't know without losing his voice. And that took the longest. I mean, it's,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So best of luck with that.
It's funny. I think you had the horrible timing, and at the same time, it was great timing. This is a book. Let's not focus on the ghouls. There's a focus on zombies. It is about people. It is about humanity. And we're going through a pandemic right now. It's the reason why we're doing this on a computer and not in person. Are you dealing with, you have Bent Heavens out, you have this thing out, you can't go anywhere. And at the same time, it's such a timely book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's strange. I have essentially four books coming out this year. And I picked the worst year to have like all of my stuff come out. And on the one hand, of course, it's surprising, writing a book about a zombie pandemic, and then a once in a multiple generations pandemic happens. But that said, Romero was, renowned for somehow being a soothsayer and knowing what was coming. All of his zombie films in particular were incredibly ahead of their time. Dawn of the Dead was taking on, obviously well-known consumerism well before people were really dealing with it in a popular media like that. His film Diary of the Dead, which I can't remember when it was come out, 2008 maybe, or somewhere in there, 2006. Somebody will Google it and type it up. But like that was, I think at that time, MySpace was probably as far as social media went, and he made this incredible movie that predicted so many of the downfalls of social media and sort of the point the camera at me culture. So he was just, that was just his genius. He was at least touched by genius, and that's just this instinct to have his finger on whatever was going on or about to go on. So I think what makes a work of art truly timeless art, I think when it grows with you. Night of the Living Dead is a film that meant something to me as a 5-year-old. It meant something totally different to me as an 18-year-old. It means something different to me today. His work is like that, and I think I shouldn't be too surprised that it's so timely right now. And it's timely on multiple fronts. Yeah, it's about a pandemic, but really, he never viewed the zombie so much as the pandemic. It was more of an uprising. And if anything was the pandemic, it was the people. They were the virus. They were the plague. And it's from the ending scene of Night of the Living Dead to the ending scene of The Living Dead, the novel. He was. I'm not going to spoil the end of the book, but it is about an uprising, and it is about abuse of power by to be vague, militia. So yeah, it's astounding how he was able to see into the future, it seemed.
True. We're not going to give anybody the ending or, the last three words, any of that. But the scope of this thing, it's not only a massive book in terms of pages, which you mentioned at some point, Romero wanted. He wanted to be a door stopper, conversation starter and conversation ender. But when I started reading it, I saw sort of the cinematic sense of jumping from one place to another, from one character to another. Do you think at some point this will become a film, and what will be that process? Because as it is right now, it's a 12-hour movie. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly possible. Yeah, I think any new project with his name on it is going to have a certain amount of attention as a film or TV property. There's nothing I can really officially say about that right now. I think, both are possible. Both approaches would be possible in theory. I think a movie would have certain challenges because of the scope of it. It's interesting because, he wanted to go big with his movies. Kind of famously, Day of the Dead was supposed to be, the Lawrence of Arabia of zombie movies. It was supposed to be this massive, massive movie. And at the last minute, severe budget cuts came down, which always happened to him. And he had to scale it way down. Now, I wouldn't change a thing. I love Day of the Dead. I love how tight it is. But essentially, he made these zombie movies that were generally small pictures about a controlled set of characters in almost one location every time. But he'd always been knocking at that door of an epic. And the book was his chance to put all those frustrations of all those things he couldn't do into one book. So finally he could use that cinematic cross-cutting between locations across the country that he never could have gotten. I mean, the sad fact of the matter is, while this book, it might turn into a film or a TV show someday, they never would have let George make it. And there's something intrinsically kind of sad about that. Like he changed horror, he changed independent filmmaking. He inspired the careers of uncountable artists, writers, and directors, and more. But when the chips were down, they weren't really there for him. So there's a bittersweetness to some of this.
Definitely. I don't think he got the recognition in life that he's gotten in the last 5 years. And I think it's a testament to staying power that new generations of horror fans and horror filmmakers and writers, we're still talking about him. Yeah. It's like, that Lovecraft type of thing where he will never die. He will never go away. And now we're here talking about him again, but also talking about you, which sort of makes me wonder. You just mentioned your 4 books in a year during the pandemic. What happens to that work where you are basically on top of this book, plugging, talking, doing interviews? What happens to the other work? Do you find the time to do more of the same?
Well, I mean, this book certainly is the sort of juggernaut in the middle of the other projects. This was the biggest one. And everything else kind of revolved around that. When this book got delayed because of the pandemic, it was supposed to come out in June. That definitely tightened the screws a little bit on the whole idea that it was actually, if you start with last October, it was actually 5 projects in 12 months. So the shifting of Living Dead did make things right now uncomfortably close. Like I have a book coming out next month, and then the first issue of my 8-issue comic coming out also next month. So within 2 months, there's 3 projects coming out. You don't normally want to do this. Before the book shifted, there was more breathing room. And the reason I was able to do it at all, or was allowed to do it, was because all the projects were vastly different for different audiences: kids, young adults, crime, comic book. So it was all over the place.
And you still find time to work on new projects, which is
yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have a problem. I mean, I really do.
It's a good problem to have.
You do get it in some ways. Yeah, it is a good problem to have. In other ways, it's not. For so many years, I worked 7 days a week. And then a couple years ago, I started taking off Sundays. And to this day, I can't. Like, Sundays are a challenge. Like, I sit around with my, knee bobbing up and down. So somewhere along the line, I got this obsession with working. And that's obviously part of that is just because I love it. I mean, there's nothing I'd rather do than sit here and write. And, historically, I haven't done a ton of promoting. Like, I generally don't go on tour much. I don't go to too many conferences or conventions or anything like that. My MO has always been, and I'm not saying I'm right, I'm probably, in fact, wrong, that the best promo I could do for a book was to write another book, to have another book ready and just have a lot of product, because I'm always in the state of semi-panic that I'm not going to be able to get as many of these things written as I want to. So historically, I actually haven't done that much promotion. This was different. This book, to my mind, isn't about me. This book is about somebody else. So for The Living Dead, I was prepared to do everything. I was prepared to hit the road as long as it took and to do as many interviews as I want. George Romero is my favorite topic. So as opposed to myself, which is not my favorite topic, I love talking about George Romero. I mean, I have a ton of events, and I would do a ton more. This is fun for me.
All right. So let's go back to George. Hippos aside, was there a point in time where you're sitting there, you're writing, maybe you're trying to reshape some of the pages that you got, and you stopped and had to wonder, is this something he would approve? Like, for example, I started this after finishing Ben Heavens, mm-hmm. and the difference in the voice, in the scope, in the boriness of the whole thing, it was two different authors. So I'm pretty sure that when you switch hats and write YA, you probably have your own voice in your head telling you to do things a certain way, but you couldn't call Romero up and ask him stuff. So it had to be a very different relationship with this collaborator who wasn't there.
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, it ended up being not. It's different than having a living collaborator, but it was less different than I expected. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that the material that he wrote, once I had it all, wasn't concentrated all at the beginning. It would have been one sort of challenge if he had written half the book and stopped. That's a challenge I would understand, that everyone can sort of understand. You pass the baton, someone else writes the rest of the book. This was more complicated in the sense that he had written stuff at the beginning and the end, and then sort of in spots all throughout, once I had kind of figured out where to place it all. So I always had points on the map that I had to return to, because I had these Romero plot points that he had laid out. So I might kind of go far afield a little bit, but I had to make it back to his next point. So there was a sense of like a guide rail that he was still guiding the general trajectory of this thing, and that was really helpful. Secondly, I could always call up his wife. Like, she was fully on board this project, and so if I had questions, whether it was something very specific that he wrote, or if it was just a more philosophical question about what did he think about Catholics, I don't know, I'm just making something up. I could ask, and she would fill me in to the best of her abilities. So I had ways to create that kind of push that you want with a collaborator, so that I never I never wanted to feel like I was just writing a book by myself. I wanted to be butting up against Romero as much as possible.
And that brings me to the editing question, because at some point you had to edit this. How do you work with an editor who may or may not be a fellow scholar? Like, very few people know Romero the way that you know him now. So,
yeah, that's
how
true.
did that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. Melissa Singer was the editor, and she was great. I mean, she certainly knew Romero, but nowhere near my level, of course, but knew of him, had great respect for him, and definitely, made it clear up front that and we communicated to each other up front that, if there was, for example, an edit she wanted to make, and it somehow went against some sort of something that was important to George's philosophy, or a scene that somehow tied into his bigger, larger ideas, that I would just tell her, and we would work it out. That actually rarely happened, but it wasn't too much of a struggle. I think the communication was just really wide open, and generally we agreed on things. The editor, I mean, it all just sort of worked naturally, like a book works at the end of the day. When again talking about those few things from Romero that I cut out, some of them I left in there as test balloons. Like I can think of one sequence that wasn't the hippopotamus sequence, but a different one, where I didn't think it worked, but I left it in there and didn't say anything. And sure enough, Melissa, the editor, was like, this one part here, and she doesn't know who wrote what. I don't think this works. And I was like, yep, that's what I was afraid of. And so we removed that bit.
Cool. It's interesting because hearing you talk about it, it's exactly what I imagined, that you were writer, collaborator, and editor all wrapped into one. And then you also had to work with a different editor.
Yeah, right.
We have a magical button at the bottom of this thing where people need to go buy the book. And there's a point where we can stop talking about you being a scholar, and we tell people it's exciting, it has adventure, social critique. It's incredibly diverse, which makes sense because the movies were incredibly diverse for their time. Tell us, as that kid who was growing up on Romero movies, the number one reason why you think people should pick this up, besides being historical and his last magnum opus and all this.
Yeah, well, I'll answer that question in two ways. One is sort of answering exactly how you told me not to, but yeah, if you've seen Night of the Living Dead or Dawn of the Dead, you kind of want to know how it ends. He worked on this for 50 years, this saga. This is the last chapter. So just so you don't go crazy at night, don't you want to know how it ends? So, other than that, I think if you're just coming to this fresh, you've never read or you've never seen any Romero films before, you don't care about zombies, well, take heart, because Romero had limited interest in zombies. He had to work with the metaphor because that's what his career had given him. This is a book about people not being able to come together in a time of crisis. If you study his movies enough, in particular, the remake of Night of the Living Dead from 1990 that he didn't direct, but he wrote, certain clues come out, and it becomes clear to me anyway that he believed the zombie uprising shared something with the COVID-19, and that's that we should have been able to get our arms around it. Even at the end of Night of the Living Dead, you can kind of see it. It's like, okay, people are taking care of this. There may be this kind of evil militia we don't like, but people are going to be able to take care of this in a few weeks and deal with whatever this new reality is.
Right.
And they fail. They fail because everyone's after their own goal. So this is a story he started 50 years ago and he's finishing now, and is telling in grand fashion what happens when we don't work together. What happens when we can't do something that doesn't benefit us. And yeah, it's exciting. It's sad. I think anyone going in this expecting, 500 of the 600 pages to be gory violence is going to be disappointed. It's in there, but you got to find it. It's really I don't know, it's a story about people. It sounds like a cliche, but that's what all of his movies were, and the book follows the same path.
Yeah, the some of the saddest parts are not directly tied to the horror. They're tied to individuals doing, taking the wrong approach to certain things. So in a way, gore apart, it is slightly bleak, but also thoroughly enjoyable. It moves at an incredible pace. It's highly entertaining. I think the jumps are amazing. I would dare call it a mosaic novel, in a way. It's all these magical patches of stuff. How do you break away from 2 years of this format and then tackle comic books? It's such a reduced. The difference is huge.
Well, I think for me, that's how you do it. Is that if I had shifted to something that was even remotely similar, that would have been problematic. But I think what I worked on after this and between drafts of this was the Teddy saga, which is my middle grade series. The first comes out next month, so it was wildly different. This was a book for kids starring teddy bears. I mean, it's a very dark book about teddy bears, but it was about teddy bears. So there was no confusing of anything. Like this was, like it wasn't apples and oranges. It was like apples and hammers. I mean, it was just like they were so different that that's how I did it. I didn't have to decompress. If you keep your work varied enough, and that's a huge goal of mine, is to always give myself new problems, new way of working, new methods of working, so that I keep alert and make myself work in new ways. You're gonna I'm gonna constantly feel refreshed by moving, by keeping the styles changing. So there was no decompression time. Wasn't necessary. And it was probably helped by the fact that I was just so thrilled to be working on it constantly that I'm still thrilled to be talking about it. It's just a joy, really.
I think the term will be nerding out. It comes through in the prose of yes, it was a long process, a massive amount of research, but you had so much fun. And I think readers are going to have just as much fun, because I know I did. I wanted to talk. This is the one weird question that I think every interview should have one. Philosophically, I'm still debating zombie animals. There's this thing that I can talk about for 30 minutes if you want. But I wanted to get a little bit more from you on that little dichotomy. It's like, yes, here are the places where they show up, and then they're not going to attack each other, but here's why.
So what he's talking about is the book has zombie animals, and so if you've watched Romero's zombie films, they don't have zombie animals. So this, at first blush, this smacks of something Kraus did to screw it all up. But I really don't think that's the case. His last years of his life, George talked about zombie animals a lot. He mentioned them in various interviews, commentary tracks. He did a comic for, I think, DC that featured zombie animals. And most importantly, in Land of the Dead, right before they started shooting, he cut out a zombie rat scene. And this actually became very key to understanding not just the second half of the book, but a major theme of the book. With the idea being that the zombie rats in his scene that he didn't shoot were attacking people, not other rats, which which means that there's nothing cannibalistic about zombies. They're anti-human. So the zombie animals don't actually play a big role in the book, but they allow a shift of thinking. So once you realize that all zombies, regardless of how many legs they have, are anti-human, then you're like, okay, so the zombies are here to wipe out the humans. And then that makes you ask the question, well, why? Why are they wiping out the humans and only the humans? And that leads to the second half of the book, which is my interpretation of solving that question, and answering that question. And the author's note goes into detail about it. So if you read the book and you think I'm completely off base, the author's note will give you plenty of ammo to tell me I've lost my mind. But yeah, I mean, I feel the same way. At first, when I first came across it, I was like, am I really going to do this? Am I really going to put zombie rats and zombie chimpanzees in this thing? But it unlocked so much.
For whatever it's worth, and Romero much better than I do. I think you would have loved it. I think it would have been all for it. So
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, and I think readers will also enjoy it. When it shows up, it's done. The book is out there. You're plugging it. You're doing this thing every day. I know it sounds really weird, especially to your inner child, but you are now part of the legacy. This is the magnum opus is tied to you. You've already had a very successful career. You just mentioned doing collaborations with Guillermo del Toro, comic books, writing YA. What does this mean for you? Not for the child, for you as a writer.
I mean, it's the closing of a giant circle. I think that's why at the end of the day, I could never say no to the job, is that when you see something that affects you so heavily, when you're just a little kid, you can't even quantify that. It just becomes part of who you are. And to then be at the end of that circle, hopefully I'm not at the end of my life here, but to be able to be part of the end of your origin story, to sort of come back around and hopefully create something that is maybe somebody else's origin story, some other artist's origin story. That's incredibly moving to me. I've written books, that I love, but this project is, it's the only thing I've worked on that, it makes me emotional to think about. I mean, don't tell my editors, but this is like one of those things that I do for free. Like this is, this is, it just, I don't have the language for it. It means so much to me. And I hope it means a lot to somebody else.
And I'm sure it will. Zombies. I know it's a joke. It's a cliche. They refuse to die. When I thought the genre was done, John Horner Jacobs' This Dark Earth came out. And then it was sort of starting to go away again. And every time that happens, they pop back up. And a new wave starts. And this pandemic had me reading your book and Paul Tremblay's Survivor Song. And I feel like this is one of the strongest waves. They're going to come back. Why and what's going to happen to them? Because you're basically the zombie expert now. Love it or hate it.
Yeah, they do keep coming. Their power is in their facelessness. Most monsters are singular objects, singular beings. Dracula and Godzilla and King Kong. Zombies, their pull on our psyches is that they're just everything, and they're all of us, and they don't kill us; they absorb us. I think for that reason, they will never, ever go away. They will constantly be reinvented and reconfigured, and their malleability will always make them metaphorically rich. For this particular project, this was one of those rare times where we didn't. Romero had no interest in obviously putting a new bell or whistle on the zombie idea. You know, he started this whole thing. This was just classic, straight down the center, slow moving, non-brain eating zombies, the same we saw in Night of the Living Dead in 1968. And, you know, and the reason for that is because, once again, it's not about the zombies. It's about the people. And so Romero was not interested in making his zombies fly or have heat rays or whatever. You know, those things will come, and some of them will be great. But this book is kind of a way of bringing it back to the beginning.
Cool. And you've mentioned coming back to the beginning and closing circles. I couldn't help feeling like that last chunk of the book was in a very open conversation, even though it goes back to day one and we start all over again with Night of the Living Dead. And I remember as a kid watching that movie, and I wasn't afraid. As you said, they were slow moving zombies. You could see them coming down the hill. But the ending destroyed me.
Yeah.
And the same happened with your book. It's those endings that stick with you. They stick to your ribs. And I'm sure you contemplated a variety of ways of tackling that ending. Mm-hmm. But something pushed you to this side. And I was wondering about that process.
Yeah. So we'll talk about
endings in your head.
We'll talk about this vaguely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I knew various things about the ending. I knew exactly how Romero wanted to stage it. I knew the players he wanted involved with it. There were still decisions to make within that. I knew the general tone and feeling he wanted to leave readers with from his wife. So I had a lot of information. But yeah, within that information, there was still wiggle room for me to do this or that. But the general thrust of it, the particulars that he laid out were very particular. So when you get to the final page of the book, it's going to seem to make sense because you've had 650 pages leading up to it. But if you think about it without those 650 pages, and you think about where the last scene takes place and the characters involved, it's pretty peculiar. So he had a very specific idea of how this was all going to end. But looking at the body of his work and how he tended to end his films, I had a chance not too long ago to read a script of his that he wrote that virtually no one's ever seen, that was supposed to be the movie he made instead of Night of the Living Dead. Completely different, not horror, but it has almost the same ending. And so he had a taste he wanted to leave in your mouth. And there's room within that for nuance, but it seemed clear to me the direction to go.
And I just realized I should clarify, it is not the same ending as the movie. And whatever you think I was implying, I wasn't. You will still be surprised by that ending. I guarantee that.
It's not it's not same in that sense. Yeah.
No, it's I worded that wrong. Completely different, but also similar taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
I think we're transitioning to the Q&A session.
We are.
All right.
All right. So we have some questions submitted by our viewers tonight. I'll read them off and you guys can answer them. The first one is, I've read that Romero cast a lot of black actors in his film, and they weren't typecast as those doomed to die right away in his films. Unlike other films of that time, did you follow this and have a number of Black, Indigenous people of color in your book, The Living Dead?
Yes. That was pretty baked into the manuscript. It was what he delivered to me across time and space was certainly diverse, and the whole philosophy of the novel, and which goes 15 years into the future. So there's just a little nub of humanity left, and they have to kind of reconfigure. If we had to start over, which we do, how would we do it? Is there a chance at creating a more utopic vision? That diversity is very much a part of that vision, and I think was always a part of Romero's DNA in making the films that he made.
Okay, here's another one. My quarantine movie gang did a triple feature of the original Dead films a few weeks ago. After Day of the Dead wrapped up, someone chimed in that by the end of his trilogy, Romero was rooting for the zombies. While presented as a joke, it does seem like he didn't have much optimism for humanity and certainly not much hope for our fate as a species. Being as familiar as you are with him, do you feel he had some hope for us outside of the scope of his work?
Yeah, I mean, he definitely was increasingly rooting for the zombies. That's why I call it an uprising. Like he was writing about a class, a beaten down class that was rising up to, essentially perform a coup on a rotten ruling class. But did he have hope for his human characters? I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but not a lot. I would say he had affection for them. It's why, and I'll leave this vague too. It's why in one of his zombie films, all the main characters are going to die, and on set he made the snap judgment last second to change the ending so that they would live. I think he was only human, so he may have these sort of academic ideas of how these stories might work and function. But when you get down there on the set with real people who you kind of fall in love with, it's hard. I think he had a lot of warmth in his heart for people, but kind of did think that we were ultimately kind of doomed.
That's fair enough. I do want to say quickly, outside of the questions, we have at least one bookseller watching tonight from our store. So hello, Hillary, and hello, Daniel, and I think some members of our sci-fi book club. So thanks for tuning in. Okay, here's another question. How would you compare a Romero-style zombie world to its modern counterpart of Kirkman's Walking Dead world? And did any other zombie literature or lore contribute to or influence the Living Dead novel?
The short answer is no. I actually don't know. I'm not even barely conversant in The Walking Dead, so I don't know about it. I think I watched way back when it started. I know I watched the first season and maybe a little beyond that, but I don't have a lot of knowledge of it. And definitely there were nothing else beyond Romero's zombie films that affected this book, to my knowledge anyway. As I said before, I'm a Romero fanatic, but not necessarily specifically a zombie fanatic. So I've read very few zombie books in my life. Seen a lot of zombie movies, certainly older ones from like the 70s and 80s. I've seen a lot of those. But when a new zombie movie comes out today, I definitely don't rush out and see it. But I got nothing against them. Obviously, I just wrote a giant zombie novel. But I would say the impact on other zombie type stuff is limited. Much heavier impact was drawn from things that Romero loved, which are things like, as crazy as it sounds, opera, westerns, art that his wife told me about that meant something to him. Those were the texts that I studied.
Okay, here's another one. Do you envision the Living Dead novel becoming a film? And if so, without George to direct, who could fill that role the best?
I mean, it's not really up to me to envision anything. I don't have a say in or much of a say in whether this gets turned into a film or a series or anything like that. That's really more in the hands of the estate. And I really, I understand the question, and I'm interested in film adaptations of stuff I like too. But it's certainly nothing that I, in my own work, and I would consider this, part of my own work. It's certainly not something I think about much. Keep in mind, movies and TV shows get made from bad books all the time. So having a book adapted into some kind of media is not necessarily a sign of quality. It doesn't mean the book was great. It doesn't mean the book was any good at all. Really, it just means there's money to be made from it. And, and potentially great art to be made from it, but not necessarily. So it's something that's intrinsically kind of interesting to think about, but I try not to, and I don't have an inclination to obsess over it too much.
Okay, what are both of you working on now that you're allowed to divulge, and what excites you about your new projects?
I'm gonna drink. You go.
All right, I'm working on the next novel. That's all we do. We work on the next one. It's the pandemic has helped. I get time to sit at home. Sadly, there was a lot of lost opportunities. I was supposed to tour France for my novel there. None of that happened. But that meant, I kill sadness by working. So the next one doesn't have a title yet. It's almost done, and it is the darkest, most violent, saddest thing I've ever written. So I'm incredibly happy with it, which means that whenever I sit down to write, all the insecurities jump on top of me, and I hate it. But then whenever I'm not writing it, I'm like, all right, so I wrote 1,000 words, and about 200 of those were really good. So the next day I'll delete 800 and add to that. So hopefully by the end of August, it'll be in the hands of a very good agent, and then I'll light candles.
I'm working on, so I think I have it. Yeah. So this was book 1 of that kids series that I was telling you about kind of a creepy teddy bear story. Called They Threw Us Away, and right now I'm wrapping up work on the 2nd volume of that, and doing some other stuff.
I got books to show too.
Hey, look at that!
You should go pick this one up.
I agree.
Click the link on your screen to buy The Living Dead from the Dole's Book Shop. It's right here. Okay, we do have another question. Daniel, what did George Romero's wife think of the finished book?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the one review that I was concerned about and was nervous about, and she loved it. I always hesitate to say this because it feels like too personal or in vain in some way. But I mean, I'll never forget getting her. She couldn't get me on the phone, so she texted me that no one in the world could have done what you did with this book. And listen, I'll remember that forever.
Okay, if anyone has any more questions, now is the time. I have a question I like to ask our authors. Gabino, I think you mentioned, of course, you've read Daniel's book, and I think you mentioned Paul Tremblay, who we also love. Is there anything else both of you are reading right now?
Do you want to take this one first?
Sure. Yeah, always reading stuff. The thing that I'm most excited about this year, the book I'm most excited about, is called The Seventh Mansion by Maurice Meyer. I think it comes out soon. It's one of those books that you are treading on thin ice to even try to say what it's about, because it's going to turn off half the people when I say that it's sort of about a young man who falls in love with a dead body, but it's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. It's I feel like maybe once a year or two, I read something that just makes me think, shit, I need to up my game. This book is just, I love all of Maurice's but this one, it's impressed me so much. It's so good.
I'm gonna send you an email later so you can hook me up with an arc of that, because it sounds incredible. So I've been reading some YA, horror YA lately. Adam Caesar's Clown in a Cornfield is coming out in a couple of days. It is incredible. It is a throwback to the best things of 1980s horror with a new spin. Stephen Graham Jones, The Only Good Indians. It's probably one of the best things I've read this year. S.A. Cosby's Blacktop Wasteland, another incredible crime novel. And I read and reviewed for NPR an anthology edited by Sarah Weinman called Unspeakable Acts. It's true crime. And it blew my mind. And then obviously you need to read this, because that's why we're here, and this is time well spent. And you're not going anywhere because of the pandemic, so dig into this.
All right. And do we have time for one more question?
One more. Let's do it.
Okay, one more. All right. Daniel, are you working on or thinking about a new YA book? If so, can you give us a hint of what it's about?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm working on a couple of things. I do have a YA graphic novel that has not been announced that exists, and then I have a couple notions for the next YA novel, but fluid right now.
Cool. All right. Well, I want to thank both of you so much for joining us tonight. It was an awesome conversation. For anyone who wants to view this again or share it with their friends, they can come back to Crowdcast and check it out, or check out our YouTube channel. Thank you, guys. I hope you guys hold up for the rest of this pandemic. We look forward to what you both come out with next. And if you would like to buy your copy of The Living Dead from the Doylestown Bookshop, please click the button on your screen that says buy the book here. All right, everybody have a great night. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.
You too.
All right,
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good one.